If you would like to say the Lord's Prayer with me out loud as we begin, feel free to join along. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. So after last week, preaching from my chair, I wanted to do something different. I even thought about going up to the building and videoing from the pulpit. But then I thought, no, if you can't be there, it doesn't make sense for me to go up there even by myself. If we are going to have living room church, then these times need to come from our homes. This little atrium at our place is kind of like a living room for me. Plus, we won't have to contend with my goofy cat during that sermon. I heard from a couple of you that my tomcat wailing in the background last week sent your dogs into hysterics. And I will say that if an airplane flies over, though, I will pause and let it go by. So here's what I think God has put on me ever since we went into this coronavirus exile. The one thing closest to God's heart is God's people, us. It has always been this way, and if you look at the activities of Jesus, one of the main things he does is heal people of sickness. About 600 years before Jesus healed the sick, the people of God faced uncertain times. After God's people were lifted out of Jerusalem and taken off into exile in Babylon, they did not know how long it was going to last. In fact, though the prophets told them that God was with them, years later, everything was complicated when the Persians overtook the Babylonians, and the people of God got caught in the middle. They thought they were going home, but actually, they were just going into another captivity, which is why something one of the prophets told them right there in Babylon might be important for us to hear today. Keep in mind as we listen, this prophet did not preach while everything was sunshine and roses. They heard this message as we hear it, in the midst of uncertainty and disorientation. Some of the people of God thought that God no longer cared, that God had left them to their own devices. So while in exile in Babylon, one of the prophets who went with the people into exile told them this. The prophet's name was Ezekiel, by the way. This is Ezekiel 11:14 through 20. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, the people of Jerusalem have said of your fellow exiles and all the other Israelites, they are far away from the Lord. This land was given to us as our possession. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Although I sent them far away among the nations and scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will gather you from the nations and bring you back from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you back the land of Israel again. They will return to it and remove all its vile images and detestable idols. I will give them an undivided heart and put a new spirit in them. I will remove from them their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Then they will follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. They will be my people, and I will be their God. A couple of years ago, our brave women of our Wednesday morning women's Bible study dared to read Ezekiel for the entire fall semester. Every time Ezekiel turns around, he is talking about disaster and wild imagery and more disaster. But along the way, even in the midst of great uncertainty, Ezekiel reminds the people that God is with them in Babylon, and that no matter what, God is present. And the most important point is that while the priests were saying that God was not available to the people because they were no longer at the temple, Ezekiel was saying, no way, that wherever the people gathered, that was the temple of God. Sound familiar? I love the way God spoke through Ezekiel in chapter 11 when God says, "Yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone." I have been a sanctuary for them. We need to hear that. While you stay at home with the doors locked, God says, I have been a sanctuary for them. And notice what God does not say. God does not say, I have been a sanctuary for him or for her, but for them. I have been a sanctuary for them. For us, even though separated, God is still with us, together as the people of Jesus, us, the Bering Drive Church of Christ. When I was planning this sermon earlier this week, I pulled open my notes for what was supposed to be today's sermon at Bering, the sermon for March 29th. Since I had planned the ideas for this sermon over a couple of months ago, I thought, why not look at my original notes? Might as well see what we had planned for today, even though so much has changed. And here's what I found. Originally, for today, our word of the Lord was supposed to be Matthew 4:23-24. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Right after the temptation in Matthew 4, the 40 days of Jesus' own exile in the desert, Jesus came back and was true to who he was, to what was closest to God's heart, healing, restoring people. For 40 days, Jesus went out into the desert to be with God, to face the hardest part of the human condition, temptation. But after 40 days, Jesus came back from his quarantine and started teaching and healing and welcoming people into the kingdom. Sometime around the 1300s, we think, in Venice, Italy, it became a common practice for ships coming into harbors to anchor off the coast for 40 days to make sure the sailors did not bring diseases into their ports. This practice came to be known as 40 giorni. And yes, I went to Google and practiced that 100 times. 40 giorni, which in Italian means 40 days, or at least that's what I read on Google. 40 came to be known as quarantine. Jesus, for whatever reasons, went out into the desert for 40 days. Then he came back. It sure looks like our home quarantines will last more than 40 days, but however long, we can know and do and be two things in the meantime. First, know that God is with us in exile here in the desert. And while Jesus is with us, Jesus is a healer in all sorts of ways. Jesus heals. And because this is not Jesus' first quarantine, not his first rodeo when it comes to extending grace to disoriented people who have been dislocated, we can count on a God who has experience reminding us that wherever we are, God is with us. We can use this time to do what we set out to do as the assembly of Jesus' people here at Bering. We set out in 2020 to listen to God, to listen. So let's keep using this time to listen. But second, we need to already be thinking about when we get to go home, when we get to return to Jerusalem, when we get to raise the anchor and sail into port. Once all of this is over, when the world is no longer in quarantine, when we are back together at 1910 Bering Drive, we need to do what Jesus did after his own 40 days. Return with a renewed vigor for what was supposed to be our mission, no matter what. Proclaim the good news of the kingdom, heal the sick, and never lose sight of the fact that the assembly of God's people, while it certainly builds us up, is ultimately a mission. And that mission is to invite everyone into the story of Jesus. We will still spend the rest of 2020 listening to God just as we started off doing in January, just as we are doing now, and just as we will keep doing. And likewise, our mission will remain exactly the same. Invite everyone into the story of Jesus. The day after Ash Wednesday, about a month ago, on Thursday, February 27th, I took my lunch down to the quiet space at Bering that we have just recently remodeled. I sat with my lunch for about 30 minutes in the quiet, and I just stared at the writing on the wall, literally what is written there on the wall. Be still and know that I am God. From Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. If we are in Babylon, be still and know that I am God. If we are in the desert with Jesus, be still and know that I am God. And when all of this is said and done, and we get to go back to some kind of normal, God will still be God. And we will still be the people of God. And we will have plenty of work to do when it comes to sharing the good news. So God be with you until we meet again. Amen.